So our next panel is going to be a roundtable, North Caucasus Studies as Regional Studies. And our first speaker is going to be Diego Benning Wang with a presentation titled Defining the North Caucasus. Diego Benning Wang is a historian of the Caucasus and Armenia, as well as the vice president and co-founder of ENCS. Diego received his PhD in history from Princeton University 2 years ago and holds an MA in Russian Studies from Columbia University and a BA in Russian Studies from New York University. He is currently a visiting scholar at Harvard University and is expected to receive a master's degree in Armenian Studies from Harvard in 2027. Diego has played a central role in the creation of ENCS and in shaping its intellectual vision. Today, his presentation invites us to think critically about geography, history, and the categories we use to understand this complex and interconnected region.
Good afternoon. Thanks, everyone, for attending this event. We have already kickstarted our conversation and discussion on how to define the North Caucasus. As those of you who have gone over our association's mission statement might have noticed the omission of a definition of the North Caucasus, and this omission was intentional, myself being the author of the original draft of the mission statement. So how do we define the North Caucasus? In the next few minutes, I'm going to offer an open-ended presentation of my take of how to define or how to avoid defining the North Caucasus. So the question of how to define the North Caucasus is not only a geographic or geopolitical question, but also a historical, ethnographic, and epistemological one. It asks where the North Caucasus begins and ends, which communities belong to it, and which historical experiences give it coherence. A geographic map, as Professor Ramos suggested, could offer several possible answers. The North Caucasus could mean the northern slope of the Greater Caucasus Ridge. It could mean the Russian Federation's ethnic republics from Adygea to Dagestan. It could mean the North Caucasus Federal District, the Северо-Кавказский федеральный округ, created in 2010 under the presidency of Dmitry Medvedev. It could mean the agglomeration of the territories where the Northwest Caucasian and Northeast Caucasian languages have been spoken natively since the pre-Tsarist period. It could also mean the Cis-Caucasian military frontier, the mountaineer societies conquered by the Russian Empire, or the Soviet and post-Soviet republics formed in the aftermath of that conquest. None of these definitions is unsubstantiated. Each one corresponds to a real historical or geographic formation. The difficulty lies in their failure to converge. Administrative borders do not match historical regions. Language families cross state frontiers and intersect with Turkic, Iranic, Kartvelian, Slavic, Germanic, and even Finnic languages. Mountain watersheds do not contain human settlements, much less recent migration, either forced or voluntary. Soviet nationality categories often appropriate older distinctions, distort them, and create new ones at the same time. The North Caucasus, therefore, presents a problem of definition because the tools used to define it are variegated and mutually contradictory. The first of these tools is ethnicity itself. The indigenous communities of the North Caucasus are often described through the taxonomy of nationalities. The Avars, the Darguas, Chechens, Ingush, Kabardians, Cherkess, Atigitsa, Karachais, Molkars, Nogais, Abaza, Ossetians, and others. These ethnics correspond to institutions, identities, memories, and political demands. At the same time, they cannot be treated as transparent descriptions of timeless communities. Russian imperial ethnography, military administration, Soviet censuses, passport nationality categories, autonomous territories, schools, and language and literary language policy all help transform fluid local identities into official ethno-national categories. Francine Hirsch's account of Soviet nationality making is a useful analytical tool in this case. Soviet power did not merely govern nations that already existed in stable form. It organized populations into national categories and then incorporated these categories into the state. The first Soviet census in 1926 played a central role in this process. It assigned individuals to ethno-national categories even where local belonging had often been organized through village, clan, region, estate, religious practice, or political allegiance. A category could precede the national consciousness that it later appeared to record. The Circassian case shows this process through fragmentation. The broad self-definition of Adiga includes Western Circassians, Kabardians, Ubykh, Shapsut, Abazak, Pseduch, Beslanese, and related groups. Soviet and Russian classification divided this broader world into several official nationalities, each connected to particular territories, literary standards, and administrative hierarchies. These divisions were not completely baseless. Kabarda had its own political history, which Ian has written exclusively about. Western Circassian communities have their own tribal and regional distinctions. The Black Sea coast and the Central Caucasus did not experience Ottoman rule or Russian conquest in identical ways. Soviet policy did something more specific than invention. It converted differences into separate nationality categories and made those categories durable. Dagestan presents the opposite pattern, as Professor Reynolds has already noted. In Dagestan, classification has often consolidated smaller communities into larger official nationalities. The Andik and Tsetzik, or Didoic peoples, as well as the Archi and other communities, were incorporated into the Avar nationality. The Kaitaks and the Kubachis were incorporated into the Dargwa or Dargin nationality. And these umbrella identities became real through the education system, literary languages, political representation, and census practice. A person could be Avar in the census, Andi or Didoi in social intercourse, attached to a particular village in everyday life, and Dagestani outside the republic. The Soviet state did not erase all local identities, but it required them to pass through a limited number of official taxonomies. The Karachais and the Malkars or Balkars illustrate yet another pattern. Here, a closely related Turkic-speaking highland population was divided into two official nationalities and placed inside two different dual titular republics. The Karachais with the Circassians or the Cherkess, the Malkars with the Kabardians. So shared language, accounts of ethnogenesis, the Alan Abogar lineage, oral tradition, and mountain settlement patterns, material culture, as well as older self-designations such as Taulu or Alam did not produce a single administrative homeland. The Stalinist-era deportations reveal the power of these categories in their most violent form. The Karachais and the Malkars were deported as entire people groups, erased from maps, and later restored within the same divided republican framework, something which I think Ian is currently working on. So as Alexander Nekrich, Tara Martin, Jeremy Smith, and many others have suggested, ethno-national categories became a mechanism of collective punishment and rehabilitation. And the Nogais raised a different question of what kind of belonging qualifies a community as North Caucasian. If the term refers to indigenous Caucasian-speaking mountaineer communities, the Nogais stand outside that core. They are a Turkic Kipchak people tied to the Nogai horde and the Pontic-Caspian steppe. If the term refers to historical and administrative embeddedness in the region, the Nogais clearly belong. Nogai communities stretch across Dagestan, Stavropolye, Karacháyevo-Cherkessia, Chechnya, and adjacent territories. The Nogai steppe itself forms part of the North Caucasian foreland. The Nogai case forces a distinction between the mountain core and the steppe frontier, both of which appear in different definitions of the region. The Kipchak-speaking Kumyks also bear less marked similarities to the Nogais in this case. The same instability appears in territorial administration. The North Caucasian Federal District seems, by name, to solve the problem. It includes Dagestan, Chechnya, Ingushetia, North Ossetia, Kabardino-Balkaria, Karacháyevo-Cherkessia, and Stavropol Krai. Its exclusions are immediately revealing. Adygea, a Circassian titular republic and an obvious part of the Northwest Caucasus with the Caucasus Nature Reserve, Caucasus Zapovednik, covering part of its territory, it belongs to the Southern Federal District, usually Federalny Okrug. Whereas the Krasnodar Krai, which contains the Kuban, the Black Sea Circassian coast, Sochi, Tuapse, Anapa, Khosta, Krasnaya Polyana, and other central sites of the Russo-Circassian War, also lies outside the district. And not to mention Rostov-na-Donu, Rostov-on-Don, long a functional gateway to the North Caucasus, stands outside but hosts the headquarters of the North Caucasian Railroad. The inclusion of Stavropolye creates the reverse problem. Stavropolye is crucial to the administrative history of the North Caucasus, but much of his territory belongs to the steppe and semi-desert foreland rather than the mountain landscape. It functions as a threshold between the Eastern European plain, the Ciscaucasian steppe, the mountain republics. The federal district, therefore, underreaches and overreaches at the same time. It excludes historically central Western territories and includes the northern foreland zone whose Caucasian character depends on the criterion used. Older functional institutes preserve broader geographies. North Caucasus Railroad, headquartered in Rostov-on-Don, covers Rostov Oblast, Krasnodar Krai, Adygea, Stavropol Krai, and the republics of Chechnya, Ingushetia, Kabardino-Balkaria, and North Ossetia. Its geography reflects transit infrastructure, imperial administration, military logistics, and economic integration more than the North Caucasus Federal District created in 2010. The toponym North Caucasus here looms larger than the political administrative unit that now bears the same label. And Dagestan offers a more concentrated example of the mismatch between administrative toponym and territory. The historical Dagestan, or the land of mountains, refers to the eastern Caucasus Mountain and the Caspian littoral. Avaria, Akushadargo, Kaitak, Lakia, Tabasaran, Derbent, and the Samur and Sulaka riverbed, which some of you have visited, as well as the local societies inhabiting these regions. Whereas the modern Republic of Dagestan preserves this historical name, but not the historically accurate geography. To the south, the republic is too narrow since Lezgik and Nakh-Dagestani settlement continues into northern Azerbaijan. The Lezgis, Tsakhurs, Avars, Rutus, Mountain Jews, Muslim Tats, and related communities were divided by imperial and Soviet borders. To the north, the republic is too broad, since it includes lowlands, steppe, and desert district tied to Kizlyar, Sarikum, the Terek-Caspian corridor, and the Nogai steppe. And cross-border Dagestani communities showed the same problem in human terms. Tsakhur settlement linked to the Upper Samur and Ilisu, Zakatala, and Gakh. The Ilisu Sultanate straddled the crest rather than remaining neatly on one side. Avar communities in Balakan, Zakatala, Gakh, and Georgia's Klareli district now show that Dagestani ethno-linguistic settlement crosses the borders of Russia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia. Dagestan may refer to a republic, a historical mountain Caspian region, or a wider Eastern Caucasian network where the Shafi madhab of Sunni Islam and the literary use of Quranic Arabic were and continue to be dominant. And these delineations overlap without fully converging. Physical geography is similarly problematic. The Greater Caucasus Ridge is the conventional watershed between the North and South Caucasus, but the watershed does not align cleanly with political borders, contrary to what Professor Reynolds has hinted earlier. The historical region of Tusheti politically belongs to Georgia, but its waters flow northward through the Anti-Khoisu and into the Sulak system. The northern part of Khevsureti, especially the Arkhuni and Arkhoti valleys, presents a similar ambiguity. Northeastern Azerbaijan also complicates the line. Quba, Gusar, Khachmas, and the Samur zone lie on the Caspian-facing flank of the Greater Caucasus Ridge and drain directly toward the Caspian rather than into the Kura-Aras basin. The two maritime ends weaken the mountain walled model even further. At the Caspian end, the range descends into the Derbent corridor and the Samur borderland. The mountains cease to divide in any simple way and open toward a coastal passage between Azerbaijan and Dagestan. At the Black Sea end, the range narrows into the Gelendzhik, Sochi, Gagauz littoral, formerly known as the Russian or Soviet Riviera. Here, the question of geography merges with the contested sovereignty. Abkhazia, I don't remember who mentioned it, but it's definitely been brought up. Professor Reynolds did. Abkhazia is internationally recognized by the international society as a part of Georgia. However, it is de facto self-governed and militarily controlled, occupied, if you will, by Russia, and it is linguistically connected, at least through a plurality, if not majority, of its population to the Northwest Caucasus. The northern boundary of the North Caucasus is equally unstable. One tradition places the boundary of the Caucasus at the Kumal-Manish Depression, which separates the Eastern European plain from Ciscaucasia. Another places the Europe-Asia boundary along the crest of the Greater Caucasus Ridge, including the Elbrus. The same territory can therefore appear as part of Europe, part of Asia, or a borderland between the two, depending on the convention chosen. The North Caucasus is the southern edge of the Eastern European plain under one scheme and the northern slope of a continental divide under another. Ethnolinguistics gives the region one of its strongest claims to coherence, but it cannot define the region by itself. Northwest Caucasian and Northeast Caucasian languages anchor the indigenous linguistic core. And at the same time, the historical North Caucasus includes Turkic-speaking Karachay-Balkars, Kumyks, Nogais, and Azeris, the Iranic-speaking Ossetians, Mountain Jews, and Tats. Slavic and Cossack population, which Rich focuses on in his research, the populations of Armenians, Pontic Greeks, three different confessional groups of Germans, which Marnet has mentioned, and smaller pockets of Estonians and even Gagauz and others. A linguistic definition would either exclude too much or stretch beyond usefulness. The eastern and western margins are particularly illustrative. Northern Azerbaijan contains a deep Nakh-Dagestani layer. The Lezgis across the Samur, Avars, and Sahurs in the Balakan-Zakatala-Gakh region, Udi as the clearest surviving link to Caucasian Albania, and small highland communities such as Kriz, Budur, Gnalig, and Jef. Southern Dagestan presents the mirror image. Azeris in Derbent and along the Caspian coast, Muslim Tats in coastal villages by the Samur, Shia Lezgis in Mizkinja, and Karabakh Armenian communities in Kizlyar, Derbent, Makhachkala, and Karabakh. The Russo-Azerbaijani border cuts through an older Caspian-Terek contact zone. The Abkhazs and the Abkhaz similarly add to the complexities regarding the western and central parts of the Caucasus. The Abkhazs of the southern part of Karacháyevo-Cherkessia are administratively in the North Caucasus, culturally intertwined with Circassians, and linguistically closest to the Abkhaz. The Kis of the Pankisi Gorge in the Kakheti region of Georgia preserves a Chechen-Vainakh connection south of the Greater Caucasus Ridge, while the Baspi or Tsovatoush of Georgia's Tusheti region preserve an older, endangered Vainakh language embedded in a Georgian Orthodox Tush identity. The Abkhaz case looms even larger. The Abkhaz and the Circassians are two distinct people groups, but the Abkhaz and the Circassian languages belong to the same Northwest Caucasian language group. Abkhaz belongs to the Abkhaz-Abaza branch, Adigan and Kabardian belong to the Circassian branch. The Abkhaz are south of the Greater Caucasus Ridge in Abkhazia, but their closest linguistic and kinship ties point toward Northwest Caucasus. The Ossetian case works differently. Ossetian is an Eastern Iranic language and therefore not a Caucasian one, strictly speaking. The Ossetian's importance lies in trans-ridge settlement bridging the northern and southern slopes of the Greater Caucasus Ridge across the Georgian military highway, the Daryal Valley, and the Roki Tunnel. Iran and Digor form the main internal linguistic division, while the Khudar or Tual Ossetians are best understood as southern Iran-speaking groups shaped by the historical Dvaleti and Samachabal regions of Georgia, and Georgian contact, and more recently, the South Ossetian political history. So the north-south divide crisscrosses the Ossetian settlements rather than around them. The attempt to define the North Caucasus, therefore, ends with a series of mismatches. Ethno-national categories fail because imperial and Soviet institutions reified them. Administrative borders fail because they were often drawn on principles of internal power delegation, security, economic development, and political institutions. Historical toponyms fail because modern ethno-national territorial entities do not fully converge with the other regions whose toponyms they bear. The Greater Caucasus watershed failed because settlement, rivers, roads, pastures, and polities intersect with it. The Caspian and Black Sea ends fail because the mountain wall turns into corridor and littoral. The northern boundary fails because different geographic traditions place the Caucasus at different continental edges. Ethnolinguistics clarifies the indigenous core, but its continuities extend southward, while the historical region also includes major non-Caucasian speaking people groups. The North Caucasus remains difficult to define because its borders do not neatly coincide. Toponyms with communities, communities with languages, languages with territories, territories with states, states with watersheds, watersheds with histories, and histories with administrative maps. This failure of convergence or coincidence is not a defect of the scholarly analysis. It is the dilemma the region presents to scholarship, and hence the coming into existence of ANCS. With this, I'd like to thank you again.